of our members not to, I don't know, do we need to record this because it's not teaching?
I cannot upload
it. Yeah, but it's not, yeah. So we're not losing them to being eaten by a lion or anything like that, you know. But we are losing 4 of our members next week because the other training, like Welcome Connected Science, is overlapping with our training here. Okay. And I see that the data science writing workshop is also overlapping. So, well, that's happening next week as well. So, it's like, Nikki, I definitely can't make that. Anyway.
Yeah, sure.
But, so we've decided, given the fumigation and also the timing, that while we've got you here, okay, we can continue a discussion that we started in Lusaka last year at the Conference on Public Health in Africa. The CPHIA 2023 was in Lusaka last year, and we decided to use that opportunity to start a discussion on developing public health bioinformatics, okay? And which obviously also relates to, always bioinformatics relates to genomic epidemiology, okay? We're not, so we have a foot in the lab, you know, and we have a foot in the epidemiology side of things, okay? And we draw the 2 things together. And so I decided, and out of that meeting in Lusaka, okay, we are trying to develop ideas. Because one of the things that we realized is that we called a meeting together, but a meeting of who, right? So what we did, with the assistance of all of the networking activity, particularly that Africa CDC has led, you know, we selected some key practitioners in the field of bioinformatics in public health, okay, to invite to a meeting, okay. Some people couldn't make it, they had other clashing meetings. And one of the questions always is the kind of chicken and egg. Because whenever you come together and you say we want to do something, people ask you, who are you? You know? So, we decided that, like, we couldn't say we're going to launch a network or any organization or anything like that, okay? What we said is that we are going to start the consultative process, right? Towards, like, because ultimately what we want is we want buy-in from the institutions. We don't want individuals. We don't want Stanislas to be responsible for West African bioinformatics, whatever it is. We want the Institut Pasteur de Côte d'Ivoire to feel that it must contribute to we want the director to say, no, look, let us join this network or something like that, you know? And in order to, if we want to get to the point where we have a properly grounded network, then we need to start the process of consultation and gathering people's ideas, you know, for how we can move. And then ultimately, probably in-person consultation meetings before we get to the point of actually launching anything, okay? So that's why I wanted at the start to make it clear that these are informal discussions amongst practitioners in the field, okay? But where are we coming from, okay? So, since 2020, so just going a few years back, okay? In 2019, I had the opportunity to visit the NICD in Johannesburg, okay? And the NICD, as of today, the NICD has generated more SARS-CoV-2 sequences from the African continent than anybody else, okay? So they have been major players in the field of public health, bioinformatics, and genomic sequencing, and ultimately genomic epidemiology, okay? But when I visited them in 2019, and I had the opportunity to visit because a graduate of SANBI, Mushal, had taken a job there in their sequencing core. I had an opportunity to, they had what they called the NGS meeting, I think once a month, people would talk about how they're using sequencing in the different units of the NICD, okay? But when I had an opportunity to speak to the director at the time, the attitude around bioinformatics, or particularly sequencing, was quite dismissive. It was not seen, it was seen as a research topic, not really seen seriously, okay? So if people have been involved, thinking back, you know, this is before the pandemic, you know, or even so, and there were discussions with ourselves, Africa CDC, other people about the need to build better sequencing capacity. But who of you, when the SARS-CoV-2, when the COVID-19 pandemic happened, in the first quarter of 2020, your country decided that sequencing the virus was a priority? Did any of you guys did any of your labs decide that sequencing was a priority even in the first half of 2020? The case is, in most African countries, it was not seen as a priority. Building PCR capacity was a priority. Obviously, getting hospitals ready, the data collection, getting data collection templates, case investigation forms, all of those things was a priority. But to a large extent, for most of 2020, it was not seen as important, okay? I did help a few colleagues here and there, you know, and there were individuals, you know, who were building capacity, okay, for this. And what really changed things was that what I call the rise of the variants. So at the end of 2020, we saw the detection of alpha and beta variants. So we saw a variant of the virus that behaved differently from a public health point of view. It spread faster. It had the detection of the beta variant in South Africa changed our country's vaccination policy, because South Africa was going to use AstraZeneca vaccine. That was its original plan. Based on work related to, because we were a trial site for AstraZeneca vaccine in South Africa, we tested that vaccine. And in fact, I was one of the trial volunteers, okay? But very rapidly, there was a decision based on the results of testing the AstraZeneca vaccine and seeing that it didn't do as well when faced with the beta variant, to change the vaccination strategy in South Africa. I still think that that might have been a mistake, but that was what happened, okay? And this discussion had impact all across the continent, okay? Who used AstraZeneca vaccine? Which of your countries used AstraZeneca vaccine in their vaccination program? Okay? So did any of you guys in the media hear the stories from South Africa that AstraZeneca didn't work properly? Did you guys hear those stories, right? Yeah. So suddenly there was this push to do genomic sequencing, and we went from like it being like not taken seriously to now we've got this massive growth of sequences all across the continent, right? And now people are paying money, good money, that they could have spent on bottles of wine or something, I don't know, good money to have like workshops like this, okay? And so we've moved from almost no sequencing capacity on the continent to, as we can see, the green. And Daphne, sorry about the Namibia. I'm sure that this should be green by now. She's meant to be going but anyway. But basically, I'm looking around here, and we are almost all from green countries on this map, okay? But this went from nothing to this in the space of 2 years, right? And what that means is generally some sequences in place, some training has been done, okay? But then The other diagram was from I'm trying to remember which paper it was. I think it was 2021. And what it showed is that of the number of sequences generated by these different countries, okay? So this is Lesotho, that's Eswatini, that's Namibia, things like that, okay? A significant proportion of the SARS-CoV-2 sequences that were deposited in global databases were done not by the units themselves. So people were not independently able to do the sequencing and analysis themselves. Sometimes, and we saw a range of things. Sometimes they would send samples. So the Africa CDC built a very extensive sample shipment network, you know, so that they could get even from Sudan, and I think even from Libya, they got samples sent elsewhere, you know. And then other times the sequencing would happen in the country, but the data would be sent somewhere else for analysis, okay? So we got this extensive referral, either within Africa, that's the orange color, or outside of Africa. And then yellow means that you're doing it locally, so, you know, Kenya, local, Uganda, almost entirely locally done, small amount referred. Tanzania, yeah, let's not talk about Tanzania. You didn't have COVID-19, so there was no need to sequence anything, right? No. Yeah, now, if you guys have sequenced, but like back when this was written, you'd prayed away COVID-19, so we didn't need to worry about you guys. But anyway, and then like other large countries like Angola sending everything elsewhere, okay? And now, this is from the WHO's document on producing a national genomic surveillance strategy. Okay, so this was published towards the end of last year. Okay, so I don't know who's seen the WHO document on producing a genomic surveillance strategy. I think most of you have. If you're not, it was published. You must look for it. But this diagram on the right is basically a part of the guidelines for what are the things that a country must think of in order to have a genomic surveillance strategy. And so there's various steps in the process, okay? Then I believe that Africa CDC is coming up with a similar guidance document, but definitely in terms of the launch of PGI 2.0, they emphasized these principles, okay? So whenever you saw Dr. Kasia from Africa CDC, the DG, at the conference in Lusaka, he'd be talking about these 5 C's, okay? So community, connectivity, capacity, collaboration, and then of course climate, which is impacting our diseases, okay? So he emphasized the fact that, like, this is a journey of the continent together, okay? But this thing of like collecting samples, deciding on metadata standards, this is also happening alongside the development of digital health in Africa. So most of our African countries are trying to make the transition away from paper records to digital health, okay? So, and when you're doing that, then there's the question of like, still, how are we collecting the data? Can we make the data collection systems less burdensome on people? Because if you make it difficult for people to, like, nurses are busy. So if you're going to make it like difficult for them to collect the data, then they will not fill in all of the fields in the form and all of those kind of questions, okay? How are we going to integrate? Because one of the issues that came up in a lot of the genomic surveillance of SARS-CoV-2 was that we collected a test from you, okay? At that point, how are you doing? You're doing fine, you know, or you've got some symptoms. That if you later on got seriously ill, we didn't have that data because we didn't integrate the clinical information systems with the testing information systems. Okay, so these were some of the challenges that we had, and then of course genetic material extraction, having sufficient capacity to do that. Which of your labs has a automated fluid handling robot for doing some of these things? Hamilton's and things like that. You guys have, recently getting these things. So at the start of the pandemic, then we had a lot of problems with the extractions and also lab workers getting ill from contamination within the lab and all of those kind of things. Anyway, and then sequencing and then bioinformatic analysis. Okay. And this is like, then we have challenges, which pipeline to use, do we have the skills, all of those kind of things, okay? So we've got everybody moving in this direction, but the question is like, moving how, okay? And the other dimensions is this. There are more dimensions, but these are some key dimensions that we face when we are dealing with sequencing, okay, and data and bioinformatics, okay? What's our turnaround time? Many labs, so I can't judge how long the actual turnaround time in the lab was, okay, from sample collection to sequence available. All I can judge is the dates that are in GISAID between the time of sample collection and the date of publication. These things, for SARS-CoV-2, it was not unusual to see somebody taking 100 days from collecting the sample to publishing the sequence, okay? And there was technical limitations to that sometimes, but there was also, sometimes that delay would be because of, because of the decision making, that you've got the data there, but to actually share it would take, I won't mention the country, but there was a country where basically the samples were shared after the election. So the Minister of Health didn't want to share data that could be embarrassing before the election, and then maybe they would make a scandal or something like that. Okay, so these things also came into consideration. The complexity, okay. SARS-CoV-2 bioinformatic analysis is simple, okay, compared to many other forms of bioinformatics. There's so many different tools. You can use CZID, you can use so many off-the-shelf, Exetype, whatever it is, just load it up, click a button, go home, have a cup of coffee, There's so many simple options for analyzing SARS-CoV-2, okay? And that's just for the clinical stuff. As people have moved into other fields, even wastewater has been more challenging, okay, of SARS-CoV-2. If you look at Plasmodium, falciparum, it's significantly more challenging than SARS-CoV-2, and again, some of the viruses, honestly, Ivan and I can probably comment on this, but I think that Ebola virus is relatively straightforward. The tools are relatively simple. Just trying to think. So we know from experience that the bacteria that causes diphtheria is not simple. There are issues, but the issues are in the lab as well. So complexity is another dimension. So are you ready to deal with a more complex, problem? Okay, and then scale. Okay, so if you've got a viral hemorrhagic fever outbreak of, let's say, Marburg fever or something like that, you can put all of your resources into sequencing 1, 2, 3 samples. Hopefully, if you've got Marburg fever virus, I'm hoping that you don't have more than 10 samples. That's bad. It's really bad luck if you've got more. You normally we're dealing with, Tanzania Marburg was what, 9 people, I think, last time. Your Marburg outbreak was about 9, I think, people that were affected, okay? there were more in Equatorial Guinea, but like the Ghana, Marburg was 3, you know. But so the scale, so you can, doesn't matter that even if you do it by hand, you can do it because like the scale is small, okay, compared to when we had SARS or HIV or TB, you know, the hundreds of samples coming in and needing processing and things like that, you know. Are we trying to still solve the power problem? But
No,
yeah. Okay, but anyway, but so we've got these different dimensions of the challenge, and like as we move away from the middle and we start needing faster turnaround time, and as we start needing bigger scale, and as we start needing more complexity, then the requirements on our bioinformaticians become more, right? Maybe you went for one training course in SARS every 2, you come home, your boss says, okay, can you sequence all of our HIV that's in the freezer, please? You know, now you went on an HIV course. You know, now you have to suddenly like, you know, what must I do? So how can we solve this, okay? And I'm going to finish talking now, and I just want to quickly go through it. If we're going to solve this collaboratively, we have to draw, and if we're going to build a network that can support us all, and that can share the load fairly in some way, okay, then let's look at other models of networking that already exist, okay? And I'm just going to go through a few models, and then I will hand over to Mpanga to take things further, okay? So one of the first models that I think is relevant is AFNet, okay? Sorry, are you trying to solve? Can we leave the plugging in just for a few minutes while we? Okay. So, quite a few people here are from a country where AFNet has existing programs, right? Is anybody here trained in field epidemiology? I don't think so. No, but we have field epidemiology. So basically the history of AFNet is that field epidemiology is a course run by universities, but together with ministries of health, okay? So what they do when you're doing a master's in field epidemiology is that you get deployed to typically a district office, and then your job is to analyze is to actually be the disease detective with the help of a supervisor there, but it's hands-on training, okay? And based on these field epidemiology training programs, they built this thing called AFNet. But what I find interesting is that they've then, since the last few years, developed what they call the African Corps of Disease Detectives. And this is made out of graduates of their training, okay, who are available to be deployed. Apparently, their criteria is within 48 hours if there is a health emergency, okay? So, and they have a funding system. So AFNet itself is funded by, I believe, grants mostly from US CDC Foundation and things like that. And then if you are on the register of the Corps of Disease Detectives, then they will call up you and your institution, I presume. Presumably, they do it via the institution. They will say, look, we need people in Equatorial Guinea. You know, there's an outbreak that needs investigation. And then people will get on a plane, they will go and they will deploy and all of those kind of things. Okay, this is field epidemiology, so you need to be there on the ground. Okay, you don't generally need to deploy a bioinformatician because you can just send them the data or do a Zoom call or something. But the point is that then they've got funding to pay people with this thing, but they are still working out the details. It's a relatively young program, but they're still working out the details of deployment and how that fits within people's contracts and things like that, because that means that you drop your responsibilities at home and you're now deployed into the field, okay? But so that's one model. Like, do we need to, when we think about a network, do we need to try and develop a core of bioinformaticians that gets deployed? And I don't mean deployed in like jumping in a plane, but like, you know, Mozambique calls up and says, look, I've got this thing, I need somebody to come up with a solution or whatever it is. Is that a model? I don't know. Okay. Elixir is not a public health network, but it is a research-oriented network of 250 research institutes in 223 countries in Europe, okay? And it's what the European life, they call it the life science infrastructure, but if you look at like their pillars, okay, what they call platforms, then they have groups working on tools, data. What I mean by data is like data collection, so data sharing mechanisms and all of those kind of things. Compute, so being a high-performance computing clusters and clouds and all of those kind of things. And then interoperability, how they can make things work between the different nodes, you know. And then training, okay? And this is all, these platforms, the nodes all can contribute into these different platforms, okay? And then they have community of interest. There are many of them. I've just mentioned a few over here, but like they have a community of interest on biodiversity or rare diseases or whatever. What's interesting to me is that they also have a specific community of interest for Galaxy, and that's to develop the Galaxy platform further. Tracy will be doing some training with Galaxy next week, but that's also being developed by a community of interest in Elixir. Okay. And then they have coordinating groups that work with this governance structure to coordinate the activity. Okay, so this is another model where the different nodes each have their own funding, but they work on, they basically develop projects together. Okay, and I mean, yeah. Another example is Phage. Okay. Phage is different to the previous example, so it's not. So it's mostly volunteer driven, but what it tries to do is put together knowledgeable people to put together guidance on different topics. How to, like the pipelines group is working on guidance on tools for analyzing TB, tools for analyzing HIV, and all of those kind of things. I have been trying to get some people to get together a group working on arboviruses, because I really think that we could do with, yeah, now I know you're an arbo person, that we could do with, because at the moment when I look at how people are working with arboviruses, like there's so much duplication and not learning from each other. So there's, like in Senegal, I discovered 2 groups working on the same arboviruses independently, you know, without really even sharing like tips. And yeah, and I mean, there we've got, like John is actually an expert on at least some of the arbos, you know, Rift Valley fever virus and others. So that's on the tools and pipelines group. I'm part of the infrastructure group, so we make recommendations, or we're working on recommendations on how your infrastructure should be set up. There's a data standards group that's working on recommendations for which metadata should you collect for your wastewater samples, which metadata should you be collecting, or other types of samples. There's an ethics group, and so on and so forth. But so this is more volunteer driven. There is a paid secretariat that helps coordinate the network, but otherwise the volunteers provide input and work. Really, it's on advice documents, you know. So it's not so much activities, although, Tracy, am I understanding right that Phage is trying to think more about like work that we can do together? But I mean,
Yesterday's meeting was for changing the whole models.
so my slide is wrong, basically.
Where you join a community and that community expand more groups.
Okay, so in a way, Phage is thinking to add this piece from Elixir, of having communities of interest that like working on a topic. So like the Arbor people can work together. You know, One Health. I believe that in Uganda you guys have an interesting new Lissa virus that that maybe will cause the next pandemic. I don't know. The list of viruses is the family that rabies virus is in. So there's apparently a new list of virus lurking around Uganda somewhere. Yeah. Nearly at the end of my presentation, the US CDC, when it realized that its states within the country were needing to add genomics and sequencing and bioinformatics, they created this model of where the CDC will support 7 regional bioinformaticians. Okay, so then, because the thing is that we got 55 member states in the African Union, and we can't all have we have reference within laboratories. If you've got your lab can handle some things, but then some things you'll send to a referral laboratory. So can we conceive of a referral system where there's regional experts, that coordinate these things, and that actually created the backbone to another a network called StaffB, the State Public Health Bioinformaticians, where they have regular calls, like I think it's Zoom calls and seminars, and they find a way to meet each other, normally at the side of another conference. So in America, they've got the APHL, the Association of Public Health Laboratories, and they have an APHL conference every year, and then these bioinformaticians will have a side meeting, and then they will exchange chips, and so they've got this regionalized idea of doing things. And finally, to respond to SARS-CoV-2 in the UK, they created a cooperative called COG, the COVID-19 Genomics Consortium. And this was actually so they had many different people doing sequencing, coming from different places, different sequencing streams. So, for instance, some people were collecting the clinical samples, some people were, when people were testing in community, they were collecting those samples. But then they set up standards, and then it all went to a common analysis platform that was running on something called CLIME, the Cloud Infrastructure for Microbial Bioinformatics. Okay, so instead of everybody having to have their own computing systems, they did the basics. So what they would do in the regional centers is they would do the first steps. So they would take those FAST-Q and go to the point where they had a consensus FAST-A sequence of the virus, and then they would upload that to a central place that would then do the more phylogenetic analysis. It would integrate into other kind of report, and then the reporting could be done from this one central place. But it was basically a cooperative. Okay, so this is a model that we haven't seen a lot in Africa. So we're used to companies, but cooperatives is a different way of organizing things. But so instead of giving things to a kind of private company that's gonna, make a business out of things, then it still is a paid service sometimes, but it's cooperative paid service, or people kind of contribute into some kind of cooperative way of solving problems. So these are some of the models of that people have used for what does collaboration look like. Okay, but yeah. So then, based on this discussion, we had a discussion in Lusaka, and then we started thinking what can a network look like? And from that, we've got some draft terms of reference of such a network, and I'll hand over to Mpanga to take us further on that. But should we have Mpanga, you want to come up here? And then I don't know if people want to provide inputs at this point, but I think maybe wait for what Mpanga says first. And then the idea is to not have to talk to you, but then to facilitate discussion amongst ourselves. Okay? But yeah.
Maybe you can take some questions.
Yeah, I don't know. So any questions about the different models and things, and what I've presented so far?
Any thoughts?
Any thoughts or questions? Yes.
Yeah. Thank you for the presentation. I think for most of the solution models that have been proposed, we can look at how to take the best of them and implement them in our own versionized way. But I think one major aspect or challenge for us as African countries is we have certain countries that may not even have a national policy on some of these things. And even in countries that do have national policies, for example, whether on data sharing or collaboration, cross-country stuff, there may be conflicts. As in, this country may want to, we want to take this direction, and that wants to do that. So, in the event where we decide, let's go for this model, or let's try to, implement something rough like that, how are we sure that we will be able to overcome some of these challenges in terms of different national policies?
Bounce that question to him. because we've all got ideas, but I think we will, but
I think even the team that with this idea started from, that was the one of the issues that came up. So the question is, can we have some guideline, sort of framework or sort of terms of reference that then are developed with such taken into consideration? So that is number one. In addition to not having policy framework at national level, there is also the difference in capacities across the continent. Like Peter was mentioning how the NICD has done more samples, and we still have countries that never had COVID. Tanzania is one of them. We still have countries that don't even have a bioinformatician, for example. We still have countries that can't even do sequencing. But you want to take all that into consideration and come up with a network that then supports the different needs in the countries. So, for example, you will have some countries whose may not be interested in looking at considering tools. Maybe they are at metagenomics level, you get what I mean? But there's still countries that need, for example, to learn even how to sequence. Worse off even to, what sequencing is. But through that network, and that's where we put up the models that Peter has shown us, the 6 different models. It's not that we must pick one of them. We can do a hybrid of all the 6, depending on our needs. We can pick one if it answers to the different needs across the continent. And that's why even Peter mentioned that we didn't want to go straight on and say we launched this network, but we want to be as consultative as possible and engage different stakeholders to really, at the end of the day, come up with a network that answers to the needs of everyone. So policy is one of them, but also look at the technical capacities. And other countries, you can even ask, is there a need? Do they even appreciate, do they have a buy-in to the idea that genomic surveillance is key? So we're thinking about taking all that into consideration and seeing that at the end of the day, we create a network using a model that factors in all these needs in the different countries. And so we have a team that just drafted up a few thoughts and trying to put ideas into how then this can be actualized. But the idea is we want to, at every opportunity that we have bioinformaticians or people driving bioinformatics on the continent gather, we get to speak to them and get these ideas. And so as we keep improving that, up to a point where we really feel that, okay, we have terms of reference and models that answers to the needs, then now we can move into formalizing, and then we have countries that for example might need policy on genomics. The network can be there to support policies on genomics. Countries that need technical expertise, the network can be there to support the technical expertise. So, from this presentation, basically is number one also to hear your thoughts, which model or how can we modify a model that would speak to a network of bioinformatics across the continent. That is the whole idea. Yes.
So maybe I have a question with the overview, especially Peter. So when users are coming up with these models, do we only consider the human aspect, or are we generating the One Health aspect? Because some of us come from a field whereby we're working with wildlife and livestock, and yet discovering maybe you're coming across these viruses or pathogens that you guys are working in the lab. So do you maybe consider that in terms it could be a spillover from the livestock, from the wildlife, and yet we're only considering that human component because we are maybe based in a, just a national public health lab, but not putting away these other people who maybe could be important. Can we have like such models which cooperate both the people outside here in the wildlife, doing the wildlife livestock, especially the veterinary life, and now the human side? How are we considering that?
Yeah, so for me, before Peter comes in, I have a question meant for Peter. But I would take that not as a question, but as input.
Yeah.
Because I think so far, Peter,
Yeah.
that's one aspect.
But I think what you
really
because one of the things that we have to answer is who's the members, right?
Yeah.
So what you are is you saying don't make the members only the human.
Only the human health. So that's an input, really, not a question.
So this is
at this point.
important input,
Important input, exactly.
So like for instance, one of the questions that we've been trying to decide is like who, if we're going to have such a network, who are the members?
Who are the members?
Because there's also been some tensions, like like we know that research institutions have actually played a key role in building this capacity. I mean, we are a university, but then some ministries are suspicious of the role of research institutions in terms of data. Are they acting in the national interest? Are they just wanting to run away with the data? So like there's a challenge in terms of like balancing, because the one danger would be that you open a network. Now you find that in my experience the research institutes are actually having better funding than most of the public health institutes, And now what you find is that like this network is meant to be for public health, but the biggest voices are academics. And then the policymakers start not trusting the network because they're like, ish, this is just the university guys talking to each other. So how do we balance these considerations, in the network? So you don't want to say no. Just Noguchi is not allowed to be a member, okay? Anything named after somebody who had such terrible biosafety practices should not be allowed to be a member of this network, okay? You don't want to put like barriers, But on the other hand, you want to emphasize credibility because, as you're saying, Kwasi, the policy space is evolving. So that's why we wanted to play carefully. I mean, like, we had input in Lusaka at our meeting that when it was the Bionet network, to launch the African the biorepository network, they had to have 2 in-person meetings before they could come up with the charter and all of those things, and 2 consultative in-person meetings, which is like very expensive, like exercises and things like that, before they could come up with the charter and then eventually get enough buy-in, That said, to some extent, when moving forward, we have to also talk about building a network of the willing, okay? So if some country is like, don't want to do that, you can't actually hold the entire continent back, but you have to balance like the credibility building with inclusiveness and choosing a good venue for your meetings, like it has a beach and palm trees, those kind of things,
The last one,
Yeah.
so I wanted to request for your slide.
I can share the slides, yeah. Yeah. I can
So
also
the-
share what was wrong with Noguchi later as well.
Yeah, so that's really the conversation, and we basically, like Peter is saying, we've also looked at other networks that have been launched. The one that he's talking about is the one on generally put maybe as biobanks. I don't know if people have heard about that. So Africa CDC is, running that network of creating, biorepositories in different countries, and I think different countries have taken hold of that, and there are different capacity building processes. But prior to that network being launched, as Peter is saying, I think they had almost like a year and two, times of engagement up to a point that they could get moving with it, and that's I think this is not complete. So that is also what we try and to be careful and try to engage as much as we can before we actually move it, and so it's really about getting some feedback into how we think. First of all, is this something that is needed? Is it that a network that is needed? Can it work?
It's needed, but it depends with, as I was asking, who is inclusive? What are the terms? What is it all about? And we have, I think it is a very important network, yeah.
Yeah. So from the concepts that we have, and I can just quickly show what some people have put down here. We basically had to kind of draft some kind of terms of reference, but just trying to state why we need a network. And so far, like Peter mentioned, we have the need has been shown, really, and also that from the COVID pandemic, there's quite a lot of capacity for genomics sequencing that has been built across the continent. That's undeniable. We also now, the question is, the COVID pandemic is over. What's next with the investment that has gone in? I think countries across the continent now have, quite expensive equipment for sequencing. And initially, these equipment were meant for, COVID-19, or were bought from funds from COVID-19. So what's next? That COVID-19 is over, then we trash those equipment or something? But the answer is obviously no. We want to leverage that capacity and now begin to use it for us to be better prepared for the next pandemic, epidemic, or outbreak, in terms of generally public health security, so that at the end of the day, we do not have to wait for somebody outside the continent to come and tell us that you have this in your country, you have this on your continent. When actually, if you look at the equipment that they are using, is one that you have probably in country or your neighbor has. And we actually then can also be able to do this ourselves, and probably one day go to some continent and tell them that yeah, but the idea is to secure our public health first. So we must be able to be responsible for the health of our people, obviously by utilizing the resources, the equipment, and the capacities that we have. And obviously with the public health institutes, I think now it's almost like all the countries have either a public health institute or a designated institution that's functioning.
There's still about a quarter of the continent that doesn't
There's
have.
still a few that are yet to. Yeah, but there's like a designate.
But they
designated
still, but yeah,
institution.
it's mostly the smaller countries. Like for instance, I think like Sierra Leone launched their one last year, for instance.
Yeah.
So it's the smaller countries are
still coming up. Yeah. So basically, there is an institution, at least an institution in the different countries that is responsible for public health. And working with those institutions, we think that a network then can actually be able to support through those institutions at country level to, better utilize the outputs of genomic surveillance. And also, what we see that is the privatization of public health, and obviously the use of genomics data in different aspects of public health. I think that so far it's been very clear that countries who have prioritized public health and have also accepted the use of genomic data in public health, that has been prioritized. The more reason why most of us can have the permission to come this far from our institutions and stay for 2 weeks, but still get a salary at the end of this month that's not deducted by 2 weeks. You're on strike. You're on leave, essentially. Yeah, so I think that is seen in the demonstration of the acceptance and the willingness to support capacity building, for countries in bioinformatics. And we can gladly go back after 2 weeks and still wait for our salary to be credited. Otherwise, we will say, okay, 2 weeks, we'll cut off your salary. You will not want to work. So there's also the other fact that at country level, continental level, there is prioritization of capacity building for bioinformatics and establishing systems, obviously as seen through the Africa, PGI as an initiative, being driven through the AU and Africa CDC. That obviously also just demonstrates that the need is actually very, very clear. But obviously, for us to come up with this, network, we need to be, I think the point that she brings here, we tried to put it up here where we say multidisciplinary team, but I think we need to be more explicit to be clear also that we need to think about beyond the discipline, but think about beyond the sectors and be inclusive in terms of having a One Health approach. And thanks for that input. So in this document, we basically have put up those thoughts to justify why we need the network. We tried to spell out a few thoughts around what the vision and the mission could be, and these are early thoughts really, and input is welcome from the team here. So we want to basically have a network that supports bioinformatics on the continent, and obviously this would be important for us to address the public health threats in a timely manner, with obviously the quality that it deserves. But we want this to see this network as one that's dedicated for capacity building within the African continent, to use bioinformatics and computational biology in a sustainable and very transparent and inclusive way. Inclusive here to mean One Health. I think, Peter, I need to put that comment on the document.
I will put it now.
Sure. So in terms of how we see this network to operate, principle is obviously one of them is accountability. We want guidances the network to provide, guidances in terms of what protocols, can be used, what tools. So for example, I think one of the outputs from the biorepository network, they are saying that they will build this network that keeps or stores biological material. But the question is, what are they for? What will they be used? So there is another initiative then that says, okay, we are going to ride on this, repository network to basically then, develop diagnostics, validate diagnostics, evaluate diagnostic tools that then can be used on the continent. So from that, the idea is that if a diagnostic tool or method is validated and evaluated in Benin, and a method they used to validate that, is shared across, there's no need for Namibia to come and evaluate and validate the same, tool. You essentially just, pick the report, adopt the report, because the method that they used is clear, is one that is, shared and agreed with everyone. So there's no need for Namibia to go and, procure that tool and then start going through the evaluation and validation process at the expense of public health security, when there's already a validation that has been done, in one country. And that is the whole idea here. So if a tool has been validated and it works, and the network says this pipeline for Lassa fever has been validated, there's no need for someone to come and revalidate it. To just pick it, and the network then can give us guidances in terms of these are the validated tools, and you can just pick up and basically use them. So that's one of the principles that we're thinking that this network should be able to derive. The next is the unit of purpose. Obviously, the common goal here is public health. And even as we have been very inclusive and working together, we need to have a common purpose that we want to accomplish at the end of the day. Obviously, in terms of the other principles to do with efficiency, we want to be sure that we have activities that are clearly outlined with responsibilities in a streamlined manner. You don't want this, something else is happening there, things happening there. No. So we want to be efficient. We don't want the same things to be looked through over and over again. In terms of our focus is to have our network that's focused on securing the health of the population on the continent, and obviously addressing public health threats in Africa. And here we were just highlighting who the members of this network is. We were more, I think, fixed to the disciplines as opposed to the sort of professional sectors in terms of animal health, human health, environmental health, and things like that. And I think we've taken that input very, very well. So most of the language in this draft document will need to sort of be shifted from discipline-based, like multidisciplinary team. Here we're saying multidisciplinary team of public health specialists, research scientists, medical doctors, computer scientists, and any other necessary skill, which is fine, but I think it would be important to know, where these scientists are coming from, which sector are they coming from. So I think that would be nice. Jason?
I just wanted to ask if they also decide there, because I've seen number 4, so Peter will be all of those parts.
What?
His name is there. He's a decision maker, coordinator, the network.
No. So the names,
The names. We were
the names were
tasks,
saying we were
finishing
dividing
tasks.
I'm okay with that.
No.
Yeah,
The member is Peter.
Peter is the decision maker and a coordinator.
No, so like, you might have seen Analia somewhere else.
Yeah.
And this is still a working document.
Yeah, it's
guys.
a working document.
And
So
we might get
give it
yelled at
tasks.
by Nabila and Nalia and everybody for sharing this without asking everybody first. But I don't think so. But who was basically working on fleshing out the different sections. So it's not that. By the way, while we're doing this thing, I could already note that for instance, there's been a proposal that actually what we think that we need this thing. Somebody else came to me and said, no, you don't need a network. All you need is a cooperative of bioinformaticians. I just need somebody to send my data. But anyway, we'll keep that in mind as to its function. But it does not mean that Peter is the
coordinator and decision maker. Right. So the other aspect that the team looked at is the membership and the structure of how this network should be organized. And then we fleshed out a few points here. And we will still go on to look at the roles who will be, what are we going to call them, presidents, vice presidents, secretaries, and members of the network. Yeah, so the other aspect that we looked at was, besides the organization, is in terms of communication. How do we communicate both internally and externally? How do we communicate to, if there's need to communicate to bodies like, the Africa CDC? How do we link with, other organizations like the WHO? How do we link up with all these external partners? So we thought about having a way that this network can reach out to these other existing stakeholders. And then also handling the social media. We also considered aspects to do with internal communication within the network. How do we communicate within the network? The other aspect that we haven't yet fleshed out is the characteristics of the network. How is it going to look like? What are there going to be subcommittees within the network, or are we going to have committees? Are we going to have technical working groups or something like that? That's a part that still remains to be worked at. Question around capacity building to address the different needs in the different member states was another that we thought this needs to come out, so that we are very clear on how the network is going to contribute to the different capacity building programs that are currently ongoing. The NGS Academy is an example. Is the network coming to duplicate what the NGS Academy is doing in terms of capacity building? Are we going to be crashing with the works of other existing institutions and organizations that are, as far as capacity building and training is concerned? How can we then work together with the existing institutions to address the different needs in the continent? So we proposed here a stepwise approach. We start obviously by having bioinformatician skills categorized from beginners, intermediates, and advanced. And obviously then we can have also thoughts around wet lab, thoughts around dry lab aspects, troubleshooting, and how that can be done. We also thought about having a way that you can kind of place someone to address a specific. So, for example, even here we have different levels in terms of bioinformatics, but and I think that obviously has been one of the challenges also to our trainers. You would ask a question, someone already has R installed and they work with R. You know what I mean? But then NASA is here to introduce R. Does he first start by defining what R is? When someone is already getting outputs and they know how to code. So we thought that then we could structure the support to target the beginners separately, target the intermediates separately, and target the advanced separately. So such kind of mechanisms, and then we see how the support can be provided as need in the different members of the network. But also we were thinking about regular upscaling meetings in terms of how then we can be doing this continued capacity building. So how is that things here we heard that the NICD has sort of what they call a coding club. So they start from having monthly sessions where they discuss Python, R, and C++, but basically learning from the coding. And so that's one approach which then we could think about to do sort of monthly or regular trainings that can be incremental. So the Africa CDC is also developing the curriculum for pathogen genomics. So can we structure that to be maybe a series of meetings so that when I start from attending meeting number 1, by the time I get to meeting number 10, I'm sure that my skills have been upgrading slowly, and that can be spread across the entire year or whichever period that is suggested. So there were things we thought around having that kind of a skills up, skills scaling meetings that can be run continuously as one of the ways that the network can contribute to capacity building. Tracy?
I was just wondering how much. So, have they only mentioned it, or has discussion actually gone into that? Because we tried that a few times, and we even had a cross-African code club. But what would happen is that the labs or the PIs or whatever are not as dedicated to getting the computer code as the people are. So then what will happen is they will constantly have meetings that clash, all responsibilities that clash. Then they can't attend one. Once you start not being able to attend 2 consecutive code club meetings for a while, so then you just stay away. So how much discussion is happening from that being an actually dedicated time that PIs won't ask people to work or continue there? I think that needs to be factored into.
Yeah. So I think this is called the buy-in discussion. Okay.
Yes, no, this was just an example of one of the ways, because the question here is how can this network, the African Bioinformatics network, contribute to capacity building? And one approach that was suggested is this like a code club. And obviously at the point that we begin to flesh this out, I think those issues need to be added into this thought to say, this has been attempted, but there are these challenges we must address if this approach to be. So it's not yet discussed. It's just a thought that was thrown to say there's this approach that can be used. But the idea here was, sort of instead of having one that is being coordinated like across, Africa wide, but you can have sort of regional. Maybe you have one club that is running in the Francophone countries, for example, and sort of like smaller regional groupings, and that way it becomes easy to manage some of the challenges that may come with people not being available. But also enrollment. So instead of it being an open call, you know that if I get Kwasi on, this is what he does, and I'm assured that I will be with him throughout the time, as opposed to just enrolling. We even have applicants like Sola joining the code club when she can't even finish the 1-day training session. She has to step out to attend to other calls and things like that. So I think also the people that you target in terms of who will be part of this, it then has to be also looked at, so that you are sure that the people that you have signed up are actually involved in coding, because you're going to enroll stencilers who never even code, or enroll me who never went to them.
Because what if Stanislaus actually wants to learn to code? Because he's changing
But
his career.
It's changing his career. Yeah, but that then should align with what he's doing. So if his plan is to change his career, and he's into management at the moment, and he wants to use us as an exit route, he has to dedicate the time to be there with us. But so the point in putting across is it's also the selection here that would be important. We need to be sure that the people that we've enrolled into the club are actually, for example, if it's a coding club, are actually doing coding, or are in roles and positions that allow them to dedicate their time for.
I think earlier on, like one of the things was, okay, so fine, those classes lab have a job category or job progression that says bioinformatician or something like that, or is.
But I find
But hang on, but I mean, what I'm saying is that if the institution, let's say, doesn't create a space for that role, then maybe your job title is medical technologist, right, or something like that, okay, and then you're constantly finding that you doing any bioinformatics, it's you can't do it. So then it's a question at the institutional level of are you, because I showed the diagram of your genomic epidemiology plan for the country. You cannot execute that unless your institution is going to be ready. So earlier on, Panga mentioned doing an assessment of ready. Can we make an instrument for assessing the readiness? We've seen the Africa CDC has gone around and talked about the readiness of national public health institutions on the continent, and they have they basically have a maturity model and a progression, this is what you must be able to do, all of those good things. And can we talk about the same thing? If you want to do genomic epidemiology, you have to have at least a job description for a bioinformatician or a bioinformatics track within your institution, because else they're constantly going to be told, no, we need you to run some tests. We can't do your bioinformatics today.
But you could circumvent that. If you were head of your public health institute and you know what's coming, what the Minister of Health or whatever is not reading at all, and you should be, even if it is a membership, you should be allowed to have membership with another country who is aligned with what you want to do. So I'm just hoping that they don't make it that restricted that they say you have to join your sector or your countries, whatever, and you can't join South Africa, sorry for the biased example, but you can't join South Africa's advanced one or whatever. So it should be open to people who can, or maybe you don't even like the way your country is teaching coding, but you enjoy the way somebody else is doing it. Or you enjoy the fact that there's a female somewhere else. Those are small things I think that people overlook. But some people feel more comfortable having a person that looks representative of them doing the thing. So I just hope that that gets filtered into or gets mentioned in the discussion so that it's not a, oh, here we go again, we left behind because our national public health is not thinking about that.
But we have to balance, right, Tracy, because we're supporting ZNPHI, but if ZNPHI gets a director who is an absolute troll and Mpanga wants to leave, we're not supporting Mpanga's career development. We're supporting the development on the continent. And if you're, that's tough. It's really tough if your boss is undermining you like that, okay? But that's beyond the scope of what we can talk with. Tony is your boss and he's an absolute demon, can't be planning for that. Sometimes you have to wait for people to move on.
Yeah, so the other aspect that we also are yet to look at is in terms of engagement, like the discussion now, regional, country-based engagement. How is this going to interoperate? Because you don't want this to be individualized, because if you address it to an individual and you're only dealing with Moses thinking he's representing Malawi, we're going to have a public health event in Malawi, and all of us would think that there is Moses there and could fold our arms, and then you realize Moses is not even at a point that he can support the response. You get what I mean? And that's why we thought here that it would be important to also highlight and streamline in terms of engagement. If we are engaging with the Public Health Institute of Malawi, then we know that the Public Health Institute of Malawi leadership actually knows about the network. And when they give us Moses to be part of the network, then we know that the outputs coming out of all the input going into that building of capacity in Moses will actually translate and be available for the Public Health Institute of Malawi. So that's a sort of idea that we're thinking, and we're going to put to flesh out how that kind of works. And so we also want to be sure that what the network will be doing is obviously for the benefit of the member states in this case. So again, with the difference in the capacities, it will be not, for example, direct benefit for some countries who are advanced, but their contribution will be to upscale capacities in other member states. So at the end of the day, we have a secure continent. With that?
Okay, maybe it's a stupid question, but
No, actually, stupid questions are very nice, especially on Friday.
So it means that you are going to ensure that you sensitize, or what do you say? You speak thoroughly with the language that is understandable to the public health institute members. That's what you're going to do.
Yes, that's the idea. So it's not to be technical at that point, but to offer this as a resource or a service that's available for the country to buy in, and that's where the engagement is really very important here. And we haven't yet figured what words to use there, but the idea is to be able, like exactly the way you put it.
Use money.
We use money. Yeah, we can buy them. Yeah, so the idea there is to use the language, in your words, the language of the Public Health Institute's leadership. So one that they can understand what this is. I know there are issues that, You know, most people will think about the network, they think, oh, they're coming to get our data and stuff like that. But we need to be clear that in whatever we put there, it's clear that we are not coming to take the data. No. And that we are not going to get credit of anything that's going to come out, but we're here to support and we want to work with everyone. And if, as a member state, you have that resource, please can you also share that for the benefit of the other members. So it's two ways. For those where capacity exists, so we know, for example, South Africa here, they have some. So can we engage them to a level that they allow Peter to spend some time teaching colleagues from Zambia without expecting that they also need to learn something? So that's the sort of engagement that we want to, the ways of how the network can actually be understood and appreciated, because that way is the only way that we can have the buy-in and the support.
Can I ask a question? Yeah. You guys are more interested than I am. So if we look at that, like, I think this is where we also have to look at models, right? So I mentioned things like AFNet, you know, which have relationships with ministries of health. Pande, you were talking about the biorepositories network, right?
Yeah.
Where presumably there's some kind of is there like some kind of agreement signed in order to basically, because again, one could say like, hey, if I give you something for the biorepository, you could take it, you know, like I give an example of how one person was very badly burned during the pandemic. They sent their samples, they were advised to send their samples to a place, I won't mention who's involved, for sequencing. Then some months later, they received an email from a student at this place where they've sent the samples, where the student asked for some more background metadata on the samples because they wanted to use the samples to develop a new diagnostic. Okay? When this person had never, they just were sending it for sequencing, for they wanted to send it, get the results back, you know, so maybe there was some small print in the data transfer agreement or the material transfer agreement that they didn't read, you know, but the result was that the trust was just destroyed, you know. So with the biorepositories network, there must be some agreements that is signed, right? So again, with this network, there would have to be some model for how to say, look, we're not going to, we will destroy your data once you've done analyzing it, or we will just basically, there's no risk to you, you know. But we need to look at models here. Which models are there for this kind of working together? Because, I mean, I mentioned biological samples there, but when, like ZNPHI is working with APHL to develop some of those really nice data integration things, then again, there must be some model of, like, okay, you guys aren't going to run away and go tell the American government how many, you know, cases of what we've got, you know?
Yeah.
So this is where we need input as to which models have people had experience with, which have worked already.
So let me just
Okay, yeah, so the last bit is just the meetings of the network. how often we'll be meeting, what kind of meetings will they be, physical. Peter already has proposed meeting from a place where there's nice beaches, palm trees, some mountainside, and some dunes on the other side, very beautiful lake or ocean somewhere.
Is the swimming better? I'll find you some palm trees if you want.
No, we don't have wildlife.
Okay.
Place where there's
Which
wildlife.
species of wildlife? Which species of wildlife? It's fine. We can have the cute little monkeys, but please not. But the ones of the lions at the time.
The big five of Africa. Yeah, close by, and we've got some waterfalls, beautiful waterfalls nearby. So those are places where we, probably be meeting from. And also, but one key thing here is the M&E part. So how is the impact going to be measured? How is the progress that the network, the contributions that the network is making, will be tracked and will be measured as one part here. So generally, these are the few thoughts that have been thrown in, and just few points that the team working in the background is sort of put together to try and think about what else. And so we wanted to take advantage, I think, of our being here as people from different countries, to also throw in. I think we can bring back the models slides if need be, and just for people to digest it further and then bring suggestions. I think that should be after tea.
Yes, we can maybe go for coffee and tea, and for everyone to have some.
Let's have a coffee break now. And then also maybe over coffee we can all chat about these ideas.
And so the idea is we can think about what we have shared so far, the presentation that Peter did, and then after we can then have just a discussion to some thoughts on how this can work. Tracy, it sounded funny, but she raised a very important point, which that you want to learn from those that would like to learn from ladies, feel comfortable learning from ladies. So yeah, or maybe like skinned people. So those are really thoughts.
We aren't actually set up for coffee now, right? Because of the timing, we thought we were going to go to lunch, but we can take some bio breathing space.
There is coffee in
there. There isn't.
I checked literally 10 minutes.
But it's not.
Yeah, don't you remember saying? I made the coffee.
Yeah. Anyway,
so we can.
So I was thinking like so we can take a breather. So I see that people are focusing on that stuff. But I was thinking like how to structure discussion.
So
because we've got these different sections. I mean, I don't think we need to discuss about meetings and things like that, but like about, and you can see we've got some sections that don't really have any content yet. And part of that is because these are the most challenging sections.
Yeah. So I think basically the idea is just reflections. I know some people are hearing, maybe most of us are hearing this for the first time. So what are your thoughts? What are your reflections over what we have shared? What things can you suggest to the team putting this together? And I think that is a discussion we can have. So we can write down maybe a few points, so we can memo them out after the break.
I have like a contract kind of, whereby isn't you are targeting the ministry. I know with our ministry it's like they would want a situation whereby there's something written. Like if you are targeting the ministry, then they will want something that is written to say, okay, this is what it's more like a memorandum of understanding or
yeah.
Yeah, say, you know, this is what we are doing, and they can do it themselves and decide before anything else.
Yeah, so I think that's going to be two ways. So number one is to develop this document that describes this network. What it's going to do, how it's going to be, and all that. Then the second aspect is obviously then now would be sort of country specific or institution specific. There are those like you give an example for your country, they will need like a memorandum of understanding, so we also need then to develop sort of the template or general guiding MOU. There maybe Nigeria might not need that, it's going to be a phone call, so we're going to give them a phone call.
I think there almost always will be some form of MOU, you know, but the thing is that like, I mean, every system has, so obviously this needs to be funded and there needs to be governance, right? So every system has governance. So like the Bioinformatics network, AFNet, Elixir, all of these things have governance structures, okay? So then, but the problem is, and I mean, this is where also some input would, I think, be very useful, is how do you, because okay, if you make a network, you launch a network, you fill in the government process and things like that. Now you pitch up to your DG of your NPHI and say, hey, get us this network, please join. Then they might well say, hey, what is this thing? You know? So how to make the process, because we know that there's a widespread sense that we need, that we need such a network, okay? So we find that, collaboration between us is valuable, right? That, and I mean, it can take other forms. Like for instance, like we're at different levels. Like for instance, at an institute like Sandy, okay, our students are developing new workflows, new tools and things like that. At CPHL, I know that they've also been doing that, and even in Uganda. In fact, I've seen this is really quite fun. If you want to analyze HIV with nanopore sequencing, I can point you to two different bioinformatics pipelines, both of which are from Uganda. One from somebody at UVRI and one from somebody at CPHL. Okay, and both of them look decent to me. You know, they both look fine. But so this is another kind of form of collaboration, making software available to each other. You know, making tools, workflows available to each other. You know. So did you?
I know. I just wanted to confirm. So we still find to break for lunch at 1.
I think so. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So that's one form of collaboration. But of course, that kind of collaboration, there you don't need your boss's approval. You just go find something on the internet, you download it, you can go, you know. But many other forms of collaboration, like Tracy was saying, if we want to do training together, and it's online training, for this, you can book off 2 weeks. Now you're going to training. If you want to do training on a Thursday afternoon, that's why people don't pitch up. Because now they're going to schedule a meeting here, so on and so forth, okay? So there's this feeling, and I think the feeling is probably shared with the room. I haven't asked you guys, but everybody that I've spoken to says that a network like this is a good idea.
Yeah.
Okay. So if we say the network is a good idea, then we've immediately got a chicken and egg problem, which is that we need to build network and build buy-in at the same time. And, well, 3 things. Build network, build buy-in, and build resources at the same time. Because it's all volunteers and things like that. You know. So, yeah. It all starts somewhere, so that's why, like, if, in the best case scenario, then somebody, a practitioner of bioinformatics or something like that, goes to their head and says, guys, well, boss, you know, this thing is happening and I think that we should be involved, you know? and it's still developing, but we should keep an eye on this thing, okay? So it's not a surprise to them, okay? So like, Mpanga, I don't know if you've discussed with others at ZNPHI, for instance, but people are on different levels. We've discussed, some of us, but what I'm saying is that like the console, so when you're talking about the engagement, probably the first engagement process is going to be an internal one. So Olusola says to like management, but you have to have something to engage around. So we maybe got like some, and then Olusola starts engaging within NCDC. Look, there's this proposal, and then that feeds back into the planning, and basically then we say, okay, look, the people, like, obviously we're going to need an MOU, but then we also get feedback like, okay, but they specifically want this thing to have these features or something like that, so we have to think about like how to do that engagement process.
Yeah, I think that Kazi said different countries they've got different levels. So for example, we're building something similar to what we're discussing here. What we're calling in country as our genomic sequencing consortium, which basically brings all stakeholders in country that are doing sequencing and bioinformatics together. And alongside that, unfortunately for us, the public health and the Ministry of Health have agreed to put in a policy position in terms of genomic sequencing. So obviously, in such member states who will have such as sort of structures already existing, it will be easier to engage, because obviously the contact point for those then would be through that consortium that brings the different stakeholders in country that are doing sequencing in one place, and those will obviously be a great move for the network.
Thank you for mentioning Mpanga, because so the Genomic Sequencing Consortium in Zambia, if I understand correctly, it's a consortium of institutions, research institutions, public health institutions. I don't know if the veterinary guys are on board, but yeah.
So, so it has the sequencing lab. So all labs that have capacity for sequencing, regardless of whether they are human health, animal health, plant health, in there. And then it also has academic institutions. It also
like
has
Zambia.
Yes, it also has can I call them partners, like WHO, Africa CDC, US CDC, JICA, the ones who are actually partners but don't have a lab or don't have samples or something, but they are partners. So those are also members of that consortium. So you have really a diverse group research.
And then if I understand correctly, then basically within the consortium capacity, you're like saying, like TB, the lead institution is TD, RC, and then you're basically dividing things up by the kind of communities that I had on the other slide. So that's one model, which then could provide a model for like expanding. So countries developing genomic sequencing consortia. That's one way of creating people getting used to this kind of collaborative model. So, like for instance, Alhagi, you guys in the Gambia, where your National Public Health Institute works closely with the MRC. Is there a formal MOU between the two things, or is it considered a consortium, or how does it work?
Yes, there's an MOU between the Medical Research Council with the Minister of Health in terms of scientific research. Yeah. So that entails almost when it comes to public health, when it comes to vaccination, when it comes to laboratory services. So it is much more easier. And there's also a joint scientific committee.
Mm-hmm.
That's between the Gambia government and the MRC.
And then that leads like the scientific priorities and all of those things. So that's another interesting one to learn from. So if like these already, I've heard the bad stories, the countries where people don't even talk to each other, you know. But it's good to hear the good news stories as well, you know. That that like consortium models are possible, you know. And like you could imagine like a bioinformatics capacity development happening within these consortia. You can imagine a network building on top of that, you know. So, and I mean, I think to some extent you have to start with a kind of consortium of the willing, okay, because we know we have problems, okay, but like, you know, and maybe one of the useful things to do in is to also make a survey of where these things exist, you know, and also like look at their governance structures, how they, like as I say, so not everybody needs to follow the Zambia model of dividing things by disease, because the Zambia model is like we'll choose a lead institution for, like maybe taking Namibia as an example, we'd say UNAM leads on TB, NIP leads on HIV, you know, all of those kind of things. But like in Botswana, I mean, do you have like MOUs between the different like things that like they've got that you described? Because I know there's also different groups. There's the academics, there's the public health, but are they all working separately, or is there MOU between things?
At the moment, as they are establishing the public health institute, they are trying to lead it into one health, kind of. So there are meetings between different stakeholders from different ministries, like Ministry of Agriculture and health and agriculture, protection of water. They come together, but because they are building in the National Public Health Institute, there's no need for the MOU because it's government.
Yeah, but that's all government.
Yeah, but when it's other entities from private, then there is a written memorandum of understanding to say this is how we're going to run things. If it's between the government, it's okay. But if it's from outside, then they would need the MOU. I know there are ladies from Cape Town who are trying to establish or to do the AMR in the country. So everything was at standstill until the MOU was clear and signed.
You mean the God P people with AMR?
I forgot the company name.
Okay.
But what I know is that everything had to come to a standstill until the MOU is clear and everybody understands it and it's signed. But now this one, since it's a network, I don't know how it's gonna be understood by them. If it's just a network or what.
Well, I mean, the thing is that, like, and I mean, so this was in another meeting, but like, so I see that, for instance, like with some consortia, so if I look at, like, for instance, so who's part of Colgen here? Mozambique there, and then does Colgen have that's effectively a collaborative, and you guys, when you were in Addis recently, then you guys were working collaboratively on data analysis. It wasn't just training, it was also some form of collaborative analysis, if I understand correctly, right? So is there then like a MOU on Colgen that how does Colgen work as like because it also seems to be almost like a form of a pathogen specific network at this point.
Yeah, so I think Colgen started so before the actual Colgen project, then the African CDC convened in 2021 and that included people from the lab, from the surveillance team as well. And they kind of started like a small consortium at that time of countries that were affected deeply by cholera at that time. So it started like a consortium. So we have the lab and the surveillance from all the countries meet, and it was afterwards that Colgen started. So and I know that we have also MTAs, MOUs were actually also signed
and we have a contract per country that is drafted, and each country, I mean, yes, had like the director, like boss, from every country like that, has an agreement signed with the African CDC before this comments. So,
and that's because I mean, yeah. So then, and then like and the one thing I don't quite understand is because Colgin is obviously the African CDC facilitated getting cholera-affected countries together, okay? But then there is funding, and it seems to be led. There's I don't know. There's a Johns Hopkins University in the So how does that? It's because like. I mean, I'm also used to like when you get funded consortia, like for instance, PanGens, is now like European funded, and then they have partners. But is it like that, or is it different?
Yes, it's like that because right from the beginning of the gathering of the convention, John Hopkins group, they were part of it, and they added this together. But their role on the convention is so they have their contribution is they build the analysis pipelines and everything that every country is using. So everyone is using the same tools, the same everything, and using the same tools, the same SOPs, protocols, and everything that was agreed together. And John Hopkins is supporting on that from technical, basically.
Because that's the other model. You want that PanGens is similar. PanGens is going to have everybody will use the same thing. AfroScreen came with a particular protocol. AfroScreen was mostly the francophone countries for SARS-CoV-2, and they came with particular tools and protocols for how to do things. And it's not. And of course, there's some training and capacity building, but the tools are one of the things that's different with these things compared to maybe what we've been discussing, is that like these are decided, like they kind of, if something new comes along, right, then you can't remobilize AfroScreen to work on Lassa fever. It's doing SARS-CoV-2 and that's it, and it's giving, and also the training, it's not. Like, if I looked at, like, that slide, okay, in terms of complexity, it tries to reduce the complexity and say, this is your solution. You don't need to go evaluate different solutions and things like that. We're giving you, this is the solution, So what we found is, like, AfroScreen, for instance, the method that they used, because I heard about it from Emmanuel, from INRB, okay, and it was like this one pipeline, like, and it's people learned how to run the one pipeline, not so much like how to adapt or build or those kind of things. So like, and PanGen is the same thing. And I mean, I think CoGen, from what I've heard, is a little bit more giving people actually insight into how it works inside. So it's giving people a bit more ownership of the tools. Then I'm used to like these consortia deciding on this is, but then if you look at like H2A Bionet, they collaboratively decided on, and they developed as part of the project SOPs. So then they came up with like, this isn't human stuff, but like if you're doing, Kirsty, there was one for 16S, right? That if you're doing 16S metagenomics, then you can do it like this. And then they used, so that wasn't like, before the time, they didn't have an external partner. Like, it was part of the funding was used to do the development of SOPs, But these are like, all these like different models. Obviously, the complexity of that was that then, at the start, they were doing nothing. And then during the project, they built up the capacity to do these things. So sometimes people want you to say, okay, what can you do? Not like give me an opportunity to do work, but like give me a solution straight away. So AfroScreen was like, immediately we're going to sequence, and you will have data coming out the pipeline within 6 months or something like that. Whereas if you just say, let's come to a meeting and then we're going to figure out, we're going to do evaluation of pipelines, and like the people who just want to see the results might be wondering why you're spending your time like so, you know?
I think, I don't know, John, is a tea, coffee?
But oh, I thought we were going to lunch.
Yeah, yes, it.
We'll carry on. We're still gonna. We've got water. We can carry on. But I just want to. So the other networking models is about openness and closeness. So like Colgen, because of its structure, lots of, like for instance, the Ethiopian people when they heard about Ethiopian Public Health Institute people, when they heard about Colgen, they were like, okay, can we go? But no, it's a closed thing. The funding was raised for this, and this is the consortium, you know. And like NGS South Africa, you know, it got established, but there's no joining procedure, you know. Yeah, so, and again, AfroScreen, there were certain partners, and then they were like, these and these and these, you know. So, like, and part of that is because you're trying to decide on your resources. What resources are you making available, you know? I think like this network model is quite different to, if I listen to people, it's quite different to like the models that, you know, yes, you do have your MOUs within the country. Panga talked about the MOU within countries. But most of the sequencing that I hear about is happening within these particular like kind of consortium models, which often because of our and one of the challenges here is that when we bring resources to bear, we mostly have to look externally for resources because within the African governments we're not able to draw on, you know, there's not really funding available. I don't know how to solve that problem, that basically if we're talking about an African-led thing, but the money is elsewhere. You know? Then another question for everybody. So firstly, like in the room here, who has a national public health institute fully established in their country? There. Yours is fully established. You guys in Uganda, who is your national public health institute? Is it CPHL? Okay. And your INS is your National Public Health Institute. Noguchi is the Ghanaian National Public Health Institute, right? So in other words,
Kind of.
What do you mean, kind of?
There's also KCCR. The things that we have multiple health institutes.
Yeah,
kind of. We have the West African Center for Cell Biology Professionals.
WACPIP, yeah.
Yeah, WACPIP. We have KCCR. Yes, we even have a new one coming up, WACPIP and so on. But we don't have, I would say Noguchi is the leader, but it's not like assigned that the whole country.
Do you have a notifiable disease system? So in other words, if somebody picks up a case of plague, so we in South Africa have a list of notifiable diseases. If you pick up plague, by law, no matter who you're working for, you have to notify National DOH, and it goes to NICD. Do you have?
I think a Ghana Health Service.
There's the Ghana Health Service, which is like the federal ministry of health.
Mm-hmm. And then the Ghana Health Service will then decide who's to draw on. So then the ministry will basically say, okay, Noguchi has the expertise here, or maybe WACPIP or somebody else, we will draw them in as experts. And how does it work in Tanzania? Because you guys also, you do have a national public health lab?
No, we don't. I'm coming from National Clinical Research. So
but you've got something called NPHL, don't you?
That's just the lab, it's just new.
Okay.
And it's most popular in the COVID pandemic. But we have all these structures in the Ministry of Health, where there is epidemiology, also a response, also have an office under the president's office. So they have everything under the Ministry of Health as departments in the Ministry of Health. So they will decide who to do what and how the transport should be. So it is still under the Ministry of Health. But we don't have any separate.
But then, like, if you've got, if somebody detects Marburg, right, then they notify ministry, right?
Yes.
And then ministry decides who they're going to draw in to do the testing and things, or?
Yeah, it's actually then, now through the public health, that's NPHL.
So the new NPHL advises them on whether they can handle it themselves or they need external expertise and things like that. So you don't have like
But
the...
before that, the state will decide that which university or institution should do like the test confirmation and whatever. So,
but you don't have anything like what Mpanga described with Zambia, where they basically have a consortium and then like where everybody comes together and partners and everything like that. No, you don't have that.
it's just the minister of health, a special committee of that thing, and maybe just temporarily.
And then they will decide who they pull in there. Yeah.
Yes, I don't know. So because I know that, I don't know if it's like that everywhere, but I think that almost every country has like what we call national technical working groups.
In the ministry.
Yes. So for Nigeria, for example, yes, Nigeria does work like a system like the NPSR where we have to notify who the citizens and for wherever we have a network anyway. So for every state as well, there's a network where they get notified. They have surveillance officers, and they are actually on the SOMAS platform that we have.
Yeah, I remember SOMAS.
Yes, and they can actually report against activity, and in real time everybody gets to know that. But within the structure there, we have technical working groups. So depending on what pathogen or disease it is, then it now goes to, okay, if it's Lassa or if it's emerging viral disease, it's cholera, then the action now goes to the technical working groups that manages as well if there's need to start an emergency operation center or something. So I don't.
But these technical working groups, are they only employees of the ministry, or do they draw in other experts as well?
For us, like the technical working group has everybody from the lab, the surveillance, from the academia, from partners, the NGOs, everybody is on all the technical.
Okay, so if we take like the technical, because the reason for this thing is that because the reason that we've been talking about like a bioinformatics network, right, is because if we look at it's because of how the thing that makes genomic surveillance different to previous things is that in the past we talked about do we have the capacity to test for plague, and that means that the bacteriology lab must have the capacity, it must have certain things, maybe for meningococcal diseases, we must be certified on latex agglutination tests, and it typically will mean things like buying a certain kit, and then getting the lab certified that it's able to test for this thing, it's so yes, you've got bacteriology, you've got virology, but you really have quite big pillars, like silos between this disease and that disease, okay? But on the lab side, and then of course all of the notifiable stuff. Maybe you're talking about notifiable was a misnomer because that goes via your epidemiological channel. Okay, your lab is confirming whether that is this. So you've got clinical suspicion of plague. Okay, lab sample goes somewhere as per the system that the Ministry of Health has set up, and then it comes into your data that the ministry has got, because the ministry is always in charge of the data, right, of cases, okay? And then they write down, okay, we've got this, they investigate, they deploy people, district health officers, or whatever else you need, okay? But bioinformatics, as it has developed, at least in the academic sector, has been a very collaborative development process. Okay, so like you know, as opposed to like where you go and you have to go buy a reagent for a biochemical test or molecular test or something like that. Bioinformatics, anybody who's got like a computer and the right knowledge can analyze the data. Yes, there are commercial solutions, but there's a lot of like collaborative, like sharing methods. You know, people come to each other and say, "Hey, do you have a pipeline for this?" You know, which is why like the idea of collaboratively solving problems. And then, I mean, we heard about the NGS Academy help desk. There's the Africa CDC help desk. You know, but the collaborative model and then the traditional model of like dividing responsibilities, they do seem to have a bit of friction between the two of them. You know, and this is the thing that I'm trying that in this discussions I'm trying to think: is there a way? Because as I say, the one option is to actually not say we have a network, just basically say let's put together a company of experts, or some different companies, or let's put together some experts that you can call that you can contract in, or maybe Africa CDC pays from some experts who are available if needed, you know? Or like what effectively happened with Colgen, this project, they're bringing in like some experts from Johns Hopkins, AfroScreen. The experts were from, I think, French Institute of Bioinformatics or something like that, you know? We're going to bring in people like that. And then we don't, the network model is not there. It's like you're just going to turn to experts on a case-by-case basis. But yeah. Anyway, so I do feel like, but part of the problem that the discussion has been so difficult is because there's that tension between the collaborative nature of the fact that anybody with a computer can do bioinformatics, but not anybody can get to like we're not used to that way of just letting anybody dive in and work on our country's disease problems. Which, yeah. And I mean, which I think is like also related to the problems of like also, if it's going to be a new model, it's going to be a model that will be more difficult for the decision makers to understand, you know.
So,
Yeah. Inputs.
I think level of like now at the development, it's good to also think about the data sharing bit of it. I think this is very, very important because I think the ideal situation would be to have big PCs where people can be connected to and do their analysis. You know, in the Gambia, it is something that is widely spoken, that is data protection. Though there is no data protection regulatory act for now, but it's being discussed at Parliament. So maybe these things will come up if member states are being being contacted and introduced to this bioinformatics network to see how that can also tackle some of these things. If they are asked, you know, where is data going to sit, whether they're going to sit and still by national data and so on. Well, these are things that are mostly spoken in our member states, countries, and so on.
Yeah, okay. So I think basically the main need for this network is the lack of capacity, I mean, for bioinformatics analysis across the continent. I mean, most countries have various levels they are. Some have the experts, some don't, some are just, they are all at different stages. But I was thinking that one of the models you put out, I think it's the seven regional.
The one of the CEC.
Yeah. I think, I'm sure every country by some means will have a kind of health, a body that oversees most of their institutions health-wise. whether it's with respect to genomic surveillance, whatever. So why don't we go to that level first? If you guys can get or can pull your experts, such bodies will know that, okay, we have 5 institutions. From these 5 institutions, we have maybe 2 experts in the country. So that if we are doing a kind of network involving these bodies, the nation or country by country, we know that if there are any changes down there, it will be taken care of at the country level. Let's say you lose one of your experts, maybe to the exodus we have on the continent where talent gets trained, they get to a certain level and leave. Even if that happens, you know that that body within the country, kind of replenishes that. And we escalate that to the regional level where, okay, in West Africa, these are the major countries with this, whose bodies have, these experts. So let's link them up and then say, okay, this particular country takes the lead. One expert is like for this region, deals with this region. But then you also have some, experts below. And also at the same time, it shouldn't be just a matter of experts. They'll be at the front line, but you also have the situation where underground or at the base, these experts are leading the capacity building of other people in the bioinformatics setting within their institutes. Because if we decide that, okay, let's go institutional level, let's sign an MOU and so on, well, it becomes restrictive, and that's where we have the issues of this friction between collaborative and consortiums, where, well, I'm an institute, I'm already maybe signed up to Tangents. This TV pipeline works fine for us. Why should we join, let's say, the bioinformatics network, which is essentially might reinvent or clash with some of the policies we do? So I think we should target it at that level. The bodies that are responsible for managing these institutions country-wise. Those who are willing to join. If we can even start with 2-3 countries, we know we are making progress, and then we take it off from there. I think that's might be the best way we can avoid some of these frictions here and there.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I kind of agree with what was said. So I was thinking that if it was possible to get countries to agree on projects like project, and we're all getting our data kind of together, Afro-Screen, we're able to bring countries to. So I would like the model of the called UK, where at the labs you still get, and then you have it. So I'm thinking that the network should kind of be like at the top here that is able to provide support to everybody. Of course, the needs are going to be different. As for Folk UK, it was basically for SARS.
It was just for SARS, yeah.
But here, maybe within the network, or within the bioinformatics group right now, we now have experts, of course, that can provide support for the different, depending on the needs of every country. And then, so I just think that if it was possible to get countries on projects like Project, and there were agreements signed, I think if we can start on that model and just have the service available, and then of course get countries to agree, or I don't know, I think almost every country here we have at least that level of at least some expertise where you can at least do up to assembling your consensus, and then the further help. So if we are able to get countries to agree, at least start on that level, just get help further where they need, when at least depending on their separate needs. And then I don't know if that model works.
So maybe related to that, also regional or continental wide. So you've got regional structures like WAHO and things like that can maybe be drawn on. That maybe the because what I'm thinking as well is like, once you've done Colgen or Pangens or Afro Screen, if that can feed into like, okay, well, we want to do this project, but we're going to walk away with not just trained people, but like this will feed into maybe that like, structure that you're talking about, like that will then like now have. So, for instance, we want on the, let's say, the training pillar, okay? Once it's done, we want our training materials to be stored with the training pillar. Because I mean, like one of the things that NGS Academy has talked about is your collection of training materials. And I know that in the phage, in and other training discussions, we've been talking about like how can we make the training materials reusable? Because not everybody could go to the workshop. Then can we maybe make this available that like at every project we do, we would like the materials to be like accessible via either the central thing on the network or the regional pillar or whatever you want to do. That we, I don't know what you're thinking, where things are going at the moment on the CDC level, Harris, but you guys have worked with the NGS Academy, and I know that you're thinking further in terms of basically reusable training and a list of trainers. Okay, so that's that pillar. Okay, then there's another pillar which is like, like Elixir had that idea of a tools pillar. Okay, so we're now going to at least make a list of, so these are the tools that, or let's say the tools are workflows. These are the things that we know about, and we're going to not just use them, but we're going to register them. Like if in bio.tools is actually, I think, an Elixir service where they've got a list of all the different tools. You can look up which tool do you want for that. But I'm thinking like moving beyond one tool to just to say workflows. Okay, so like I mentioned, the two different HIV workflows that on Nanopore that I know of from Uganda. There's one from UVRI, one from CBHL, but they can get registered on some portal. You want to do HIV? Try this. Not saying you have to try this, but here are some options. And then it can be, we can have a criteria. So, okay, please make this available with some training data so that you can test it to see if it works. This has been validated. It's not just code that some student came up with, okay? Then, so the different pillars like that. Compute services, okay, or I don't know how to handle that, but like that maybe that one of the things that we need is pillars and the development of the pillars. And then no matter whether you're involved in Colgen, AfroScreen, Pangens, or another project, you can then be feeding into that. When the project ends, we've learned from it and we've taken things further. Yeah, I think you had a hand.
Yeah, I just wanted maybe to add on that, like how to access the materials so that you can have like a train-the-trainer program, because the expectations maybe some of us have is that when you attend such trainings, you should maybe train people, either below you or above you, in line with what you're doing. And probably it would be easier accessing the materials or even collaborating within us. Maybe someone from Uganda, we can have, train the trainer program within now us. It could be online, it could, because, now our institutes could maybe fund that within, like the institutions, either locally or But now having the materials would be a bit easier for us to train the others.
Yeah, and on that, by the way, so we have a learning management system for the university, and UCT has a thing called Vula, we have a thing called Ikamba, etc.
They discontinue Vula. So
what?
Oh,
the world is changing. Okay, but I specifically didn't use our university's learning management system.
Now it's going to go to Ubuntu, so Vula. So you no longer would have free access to all the.
Okay, but that's exactly the disaster which I try to avoid with. Look, with the training site that we put together, my fellow trainers might have issues with our site because it's been a bit of a learning curve to get it to work. But I wanted to get this stuff freely available outside of any system that you have to be a UWC student or what. Okay, and in terms of train the trainer. But this is where I say that, like, we can think beyond the programs, right? Africa CDC has its training program, but it's not the only player. Maybe somebody else, maybe Welcome Connecting Science has its training program, okay? And I've told the guys who are going up to Joburg, please emphasize to them that we want the materials after you guys do your AMR training with Welcome Connecting Science. Because in the past, Welcome Connecting Science has used FutureLearn, and then when the course is finished, it's actually difficult to get access to the thing. They're like, because it's a commercial platform. And now WCS has moved to, they put some of the materials on GitHub, but the training data is not there. You know, so you can't really reuse it. So, and I know that after this course, not this one, but the previous one they had in June, some of the colleagues from Lesotho went back and they actually redid the entire course back at their home lab, which is beautiful, you know. But anyway, there were some hands here and here. There was two hands.
Okay, so mine was more or less like a suggestion with respect to building up the network and improving the capacity space. So I'm thinking that once we have such course like this or a workshop or training like this to equip individuals with the necessary bioinformatics skills and workshop and training, we could set aside sort of the same duration we use, maybe 2 weeks, but then once you go in-house to your institute, could use maybe a week or maybe a month to also re-equip members in the institute or members who are working under such labs or bioinformatics environment to, re-establish what you learned to them. I think with that, it will also make the interest with other members clear and also improve the network.
Harris, you had some ideas.
Nothing to say, but so from CDC side, we have what we call this network information management system. So with that, we'll be getting all the training materials, be it from SANDI, NICD, the training materials that they're using for training. So everything will be archived onto that platform, NIMS, so that at the end of the training, or even before the training, the participants are able to access it and use it for maybe to initiate a training cascade back in their home countries. Apart from that, Africa CDC is working closely with the NGS Academy to come up with a training curriculum for bioinformatics. Because right now, if you ask people here, how many of you are bioinformaticians? There'll be maybe 5 months. How many are wet lab expertise? How many are directors back in the whole country? There could be a director here, but all of you are the same bioinformatics training. We have different expertise. Ivan is a bioinformatician. Juma is a bioinformatician. I believe there's some things that Ivan knows that Juma does not know, and vice versa. True. So we want to come up with a competency-based curriculum or a modular-based curriculum, where if we say we want a training on bioinformatics, it's going to be a beginner's course. So we are not going to lump up bioinformaticians, wet lab people. There'll be maybe some with directors. Maybe there'll be some virtual training. There'll be some virtual training to ascertain who is in the beginners category, in intermediate, advanced. So for you to proceed to intermediate, you need to have passed the beginners. And after normally at the end of the training, maybe even here, you're going to get a certificate of attendance, so completion, but that does not mean that you are competent. Yeah. So CDC, NGS Academy, and SLM are working together to develop a competency-based curriculum. Before the training, you do a test. After the training, you do a test. Yeah. Then maybe after 1 year or 6 months, you do a refresher course, and there'll be some CPD points that you can. That is from CDC side. But of course, if you have any information, finances that you feel you can support Africa CDC, you're welcome.
It's like asking the Bank of Ghana for money.
Yes.
That will obviously be an asynchronous model. But questions come up when people do the training. Who answers those questions?
Sorry, what do you mean?
When people do the training and they have questions.
Yes.
Because you're taking material from different people, and I'm assuming that those people have been asked if you could use the materials, but they may may not necessarily know that you will want them to answer questions about the training material.
No, I know what we've done so far with the NGS Academy. There's a okay, maybe sorry.
Yeah, so I don't know if you remember when I showed you the trainer help desk system. So we want to develop that as a support structure or a network. So there are trainers on there. You don't need to be a trainer. Anyone can go on there and ask questions. And then obviously the more trainers we have, the more resources we have able to allocate and dedicate to mathematicians, future scientists who actually want to do. So as you mentioned, if there are training courses and after the training you still get stuck and you need additional support, because a lot of these courses, once you come and you learn and you go back, you find that execution is very different from knowledge. So that's why that help desk system is a platform where you can actually go and ask this question. So there's various topics. I don't know if you remember bacterial, viral. There was also a section on training. So you can go there and ask your question, and you know that people on there will be able to support you, give you answers. And to a previous question that you asked, the trainer. So we actually had a train the trainer course last year in person with an X3 Bionet with the IBT model. But the problem is we actually don't have enough funding to broaden that scope. So we are hoping to run another one this year, and I'm hoping to be there to actually record it and make it available, make it accessible. But obviously we're also thinking about what Peter is saying, that after Vula has been taken away, you can't just go there and access. With Ubuntu, you have to be a UCD student. And if you're not, you have to pay to use that account. And we understand there's financial barrier of entry, there's culture barrier of entry, language barrier of entry. So we're trying to develop a utilized platform so that it's on the perpetuity and you can access it, reuse it. But we obviously need to check with the trainers to make sure that it's appropriate to have that training material there, to also think about legal, ethical consideration as well.
I still have a question about the support that is being offered. So these are the previous trainers for a new set of, or whoever it is, the people who will be answering the questions of people who want to be in training. Are they people who have to log on to answer questions, or is it open to anybody to?
So you have to register with IBT trainer. So there will be a list of criteria. So you can, maybe I can just quickly demonstrate the website.